Okay, my name is Geoff Lowe. I too have a slightly different perspective to some of the other speakers. I work for a company called Metadata Solutions. We're one of the primary providers of software for the conduct of clinical trials. So we manufacture it. We have a primary system is our Rave EDC system, which is used in most of the top 10 drugs that are on the market now have been conducted using studies on Metadata Rave. We also have an interest in mHealth, genomics. Sorry, is that better? Sorry. We also have an interest in mHealth, genomics, operational analytics, and I've been sort of spearheading from a technical perspective our work around EHR integration. I also have a number of other roles in sort of broader industry organisations. I'm involved in an organisation called FHIR, where I'm the co-chair for the Emerging Trends and Technologies, again, which is another thing that brings me here today. And I'm also involved in some of the work with an organisation called CDISC, and I'll talk about these in a little bit. So the integration of EHR data in clinical research is something that comes up about, I sometimes use the word bad penny, but I really shouldn't, but it does come up about every 2 years. Clinical research want to be able to incorporate this data into their studies because there's a massive amount of source data there that they could reuse without actually having to have this data recaptured, especially sort of cases like concomitant medications and those sort of records. But it just never quite works, and so we come back again and have another look at it. When we actually want to use it, the use cases that we think about are actually pretty interesting and pretty well aligned with some of the data that's already out there. So protocol feasibility is the mechanism of using an anonymized set of data to work out whether or not the protocol you're going to use for your study is ever going to be able to recruit subjects. Because if you can't recruit subjects, your study is never going to be a success. So it's nice. It would be nice to be able to look and see if the eligibility criteria you have put together actually match any sort of patient pool. Then following on from that, if you are actually got past the point of publishing a protocol, you want to be able to work out whereabouts you're going to find these subjects, because subject recruitment is a massive problem. Obviously, if you want to be able to prove a drug is safe and efficacious, you want to get a broad, diverse set of subjects to take part in your studies. So actually finding the subjects is a critical problem. There's a few out there that are a wee bit more esoteric, so being able to effectively do a retrospective analysis on a particular drug itself, look at some data that's already been captured in the EHR system over a long period of time, hasn't necessarily been captured within a formal protocol, a study, but it could actually be sort of incorporated into a virtual study. And then the primary case, obviously, at the moment is to be able to actually incorporate on an ongoing basis the data from the EMR systems into the research systems. It should lower the patient load in terms of you're not having to enter data twice, you're not having to spend so much time entering data into two different systems. If you enter it into one and it appears in the other, then that's a win for everybody. And this quote here from Einstein, I thought, is quite relevant because it's the sort of thing where we come at it, have another go, it doesn't work, have another go without actually changing our paradigm. And I think that FHIR is one of the things that's really going to change the paradigm. So there's a number of groups out there actually looking at this. There's another group which I'm not directly involved with called Transcelerate, where around, I think, 8 of the top 10 pharma are involved. They've got together as a working group. They put money and resource into it to actually do a proper analysis of eSource and see how we can actually move forward as an industry. And they've identified these 6 topics that they think are what's been holding us back in the past. So no sort of continuum of the regulatory requirements between the two systems. So research systems have to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11. EHR systems do not. How do you handle that schism between those two systems? There's different data standards in place between both systems. There's a comment there about sort of, and some of this is obviously prejudiced. It's not necessarily backed up by evidence, but it's just what people think. Unreliable, non-standard, non-validated or outdated EHR systems, actually keeping those things in check. There's a lot more validation and goes in on the research side, which we need to, which people accept and move on, but aren't sure that's reflected in the EHR. My concerns about interoperability, well, we'll come on to that in a minute. Uneven adoption of EHRs across geographic regions. Meaningful use has been a boon for us, perhaps not so much for many of the sites in the US, but it really gives us the platform upon which we can start building a reusable situation for moving forward, and concerns about the data quality. So in terms of some of the paradigms that change, the regulatory clarification, the FDA have come out quite recently, in the last few years in fact, and said, look, we want to make this work. We're going to work with you to make it happen. So in 2015, they posted out for projects to actually do this, to show that it works, and show that it works in a repeatable fashion. And then in last year, they put together a sort of another set of draft guidance, which is under review at the moment. So this is kind of giving you us that path, lowering one of those barriers. In terms of how we've interacted in the past with data standards, quality, and interoperability, CDISC have a project called Healthcare Link. Used to be run by Landon Bain. I believe now it's run by Michael Ibarra. But they were active participants with the IHE group to try and make this happen, put the technology in place to make it move along. So we have the retrieve form for data capture, based around the CCD, obviously, and the retrieve protocol for execution was also out there, and they were involved in putting that together. There's CDISC have also initiated and run a eSource stakeholders forum, which again is kind of broken down into a number of work streams to try and align these two industries together. And something else that can help is actually coming up with ways of actually providing the appropriate level of support for the people who actually have to do the work. So providing well-documented APIs for data integrations and supporting people who are actually doing the integrations themselves. So how is FHIR really interesting, and why is FHIR really interesting? Well, the current standard for data integration is something, the true form for data capture. And in its essence, it's moving a lot of very large XML documents, CCD documents around between systems, and then having the systems have to sort of pull the information out of that that's relevant or interesting. So we have a very large XML document that cuts across a number of contexts. What we like about what we see as being the future, the possibilities with FHIR is the fact that the context is much more limited. It's much more focused. The way we do data capture is very focused. You don't enter all the data in for a visit in one form. You enter in a form about demography. You enter in a form about vital signs. You enter in a form about ECG. And using a FHIR endpoint for those resources, well, that's much closer to where we are. So you're not pulling quite as much data, and you can actually use mechanisms to make sure that you can cache it a lot more. You can actually make better use of the data, and also have it be able to redirect back to this original source. So we can actually focus on the bit of data that we're particularly interested in and just put it in with a very local context. So what we've been trying to do is bootstrap that. So courtesy of Wayne, we've been integrated a lot more. So Wayne was, obviously, he's CTO now at HL7. He used to be CTO at CDISC. So he was aware of the work that we were doing in CDISC, and so he's been working with us to try and get something going on this side of the fence, if you will. So myself and another colleague took part in the Baltimore FHIR Connectathon last year and looked at how we could actually turn this into something operational. So we used FHIR to be able to retrieve the patient resource. We matched the FHIR resources and attributes to CDASH data elements. Now CDASH is the CDISC form definition. It tells you what the data elements are called and what they actually mean. So we were able to pull out a patient resource, pull out the demography, and then actually push that across to an EDC system. How we actually did it? Well, we used another transport format that is actually within the research domain, something called the CDISC operational data model. The system that Metadata Rave actually uses the operational data model as an exchange format. So what we did is we took a FHIR resource, we aligned the information within those FHIR resources to forms, and then we packaged it into an ODM, and then we pushed it into the EDC system. And it's a bit hard to see, but just in here you can see this data has actually come across straight from one of the sample FHIR endpoints. Now we've been doing this obviously in the past with RFD, but in we've had to actually pass the CCD, extract the information out, and then push it across. So this is much, much easier. As I said, the context is much more localized. But one of the things we do need to do to help sort of move it along is actually try and build the business case. Now we've got a group within FHIR that's been chaired by Tricia Simpson, who's sitting in the back there, which is looking to actually start building up some of these use cases for FHIR in clinical research. This is coupled with another group that's been originated within CDIS called the EHR to CDASH. The EHR to CDASH is basically taking mappings at this moment from the continuity of care document and extracting out X paths in this case and pushing it into, or aligning it with data elements on the CDASH in the CDASH model. So then any systems integrator can take these mappings and use them to populate a form and push it across. We were able to obviously reuse much of that because there is some alignment between I assume it's the rim behind the CCD and some of the FHIR resources. So we're able to actually reuse that. But we wanted to be able to say, okay, we know we can do it. We've done the proof of concept. We've shown it works. What we want to actually do is actually try and demystify some of those issues about the data quality. So there's sort of two metrics that we think about for the quality itself. There's the coverage in terms of, for a given CRF, how many forms are we able to populate from the healthcare system? And then the usability in terms of some of the data that comes across in the EHR system doesn't necessarily fit straight in. I know a lot of the sort of exploratory work I did with the sample CCDAs that were put together in the past, the data quality in some of them is, I think, strange would be one way of explaining it. So we need to actually be able to align that. The one thing that really does differ for this moment between research and healthcare is research is ultra prescriptive about how the data is, with what buckets the data goes into. So they're really, really focused on specific bits. Whereas in some of the EHR data I've seen and some of the CCD specifications, they're a wee bit more vague, if you will, because they are slightly more realistic in terms of the way data is captured in the real world. So we needed to be able to try and see that the data, we can pull the data and put it across and push it in and then have it make sense. Now, because it's a mapping issue, there's other things we need to sort out, and these are still things that are in the future. So coding systems within EHR are quite broad, whereas and they're not the same as the ones that we're currently using in clinical research. So for medications, we use the WHO drug dictionary, which is not used quite as extensively in healthcare systems. And then for problems and interventions, we use the MEDRA data dictionary. So these things aren't necessarily aligned. So we're looking at services to be able to sort of bridge that gap, if you will. And we know we're going to have to be able to do that for it to be a success. Because the thing we need to do is not only have it work once, but have it work repeatedly. Have sites on board who know that they can do this and don't have to think twice about it. We want to be able to sort of lower the site load. And so how do we do that? We know that a lot of the sites, or certainly the people that we're talking to, are not systems integrators. They're investigators, they're study nurses. They don't care how we do it, they just want it to work. And they want it to be done with a sort of a minimal amount of stress on them. So what we're using here and what we're pushing forward is trying to work out, okay, how do we actually expand this? We're assuming a lot on with sort of the general sort of wider adoption of EHR systems across the industry through meaningful use, obviously, and the 21st century cures with the common clinical data set. With these things coming online, we can make much better use of them. And we want to be able to leverage them on an ongoing basis, push them forward, make it sort of a matter of course that we can do this. There is obviously a not insignificant problem with the fact that the US and the rest of the world are not necessarily entirely aligned. So there are other projects, certainly the EHR for CR as an example, in the EU for actually being able to look at this problem and look at a way of solving it on an ongoing basis. And as a vendor ourselves, we acknowledge and we're aware that it's not a simple problem to solve for systems integrators. It's not a simple problem to solve for sponsors. It's something that we need to be able to support. So the way we're doing that is we're sort of combining it all together into a program we're calling eConnect, which will allow us to work with the sites, give the sites the specific help that they need to be able to get it done. Because if we don't get it done, again, in 2 years, we're going to be having this conversation, we're going to be no further forward, and what's the point? The whole idea about healthcare, the whole idea about the pharmaceuticals is about making people's life better. People who are taking the drugs, people who are capturing the data to make sure the drugs are safe and efficacious. So we need to improve, we need to make sure it's all moving forward. And we have, I love that saying about we're all lying in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I mean, I've been sort of looking with fascination at a lot of the FHIR specifications, and there's lots of places I think we could go. So one of the things that is really coming into its own, and you've been seeing it obviously with the patients, with the presentations we've seen already today, the patient centricity. How do you actually start feeding that back? We know that when somebody participates in a study, they're giving of themselves to get a drug that people can use. But quite often there's not much of a feedback to them at the end of it. So patient centricity is about actually making them more of a participant in the study rather than just, for want of a better word, elaborate. So one of the things that we're looking at is, for example, being able to use Smart on FHIR to actually improve the patient consent mechanism. Now, I have some personal experience with this because I did a lot of our initial mHealth work. So I did integration of Fitbits, I did integration of Garmin devices. So we actually looked at the sort of the patient integration and access to their data and making it available. So I know how to do it, we just haven't had a mechanism that enables us to be able to do it in the future. And I think things like Smart on FHIR really push that to the fore, and it's something we should really be able to take and run with wider adoption, and as I said, read more DARM pilots. We're looking at how do we manage the workflow? How can you actually incorporate this into a clinical study itself and just make it much easier for everybody involved? CDS hooks is fascinating for me. So the whole process of clinical monitoring at the moment is a really awkward and painful and expensive process. I think CDS hooks is one of the mechanisms that will just make this so much easier and so much more effective. And we want to be able to bring more and more sites online. So this is the whole eConnect program. You can be eConnect certified, which means if you want to take part in a clinical study as an investigator, you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's been done. You're certified for it. Let's roll on. Thank you.